What do you mean, unknown? Chief Census Officer Zixtal's translucent tentacles writhed in agitation as they stared at the holographic readout. We've mapped the genome of every sentient species in the known galaxy. There can't be unknown sections. Junior Analyst Mira 7, a crystalline being who had drawn the short straw for delivering this particular report, chimed anxiously, their lattice structure vibrating at a frequency that indicated extreme discomfort. The human sample shows approximately 50% of their genetic structure consists of elements we cannot identify or classify within any known paradigm of xenobiology. Preposterous. Zixtal's body shifted through several shades of deep purple. Run it again. We've run it 73 times, Chief. The results are consistent. Furthermore, Mira 7 paused, their crystalline edges dulling slightly. The unknown segments appear to be actively changing. The Census Bureau's main office, normally a model of efficient bureaucratic function, erupted into chaos. Various species began expressing their alarm in their own unique ways. The Vapori released stress pheromones that formed small thunderclouds near the ceiling. The Quantum Collective began splitting into multiple probability states, and the hive mind representatives started stress-eating their own drones. In the center of this pandemonium stood Harold Jenkins, the human representative, sipping something that looked suspiciously like a gas station coffee from a styrofoam cup. You guys do know about junk DNA, right? The room fell silent, save for the soft pitter-patter of Vapori anxiety rain. Junk DNA? Zixtal's tentacles curled into question marks. You're suggesting half your genome is garbage? Harold shrugged, taking another sip of his coffee. Well, that's what we used to think. Turns out it's more complicated than that. Some of it's old viral code that got stuck in there. Some of it's regulatory stuff. Some of it's probably just backup copies in case something goes wrong. To be honest, we're still figuring it out ourselves. You mean to tell me? Zixtal's voice reached a pitch that caused several crystalline beings to develop small cracks. That your species achieved faster-than-light travel while being completely ignorant of half your own genetic code? Oh yeah, Harold nodded, seemingly oblivious to the horror he was inspiring. We're basically held together by duct tape and spite at this point. Did you know we discovered coffee before we figured out how our sleep cycle works? Still haven't quite figured that one out, actually. We just know we need both. The Quantum Collective collapsed into a single probability state out of sheer shock. Something that hadn't happened since the Great Probability War of the Ninth Dimension. But how do you function? Mira 7 asked, their usually precise crystalline structure looking distinctly frazzled. How do you innovate? How do you progress? Harold finished his coffee and crushed the cup with disturbing casualness. Trial and error, mostly. Lots of error. Sometimes we just do things to see what happens. Like, did you know humans once nuked our own atmosphere just to see what would happen? A Vapori fainted, dissipating into a small cloud of confused water vapor. That's not even the weird part, Harold continued, warming to his subject. We've got these things called telomeres that basically act like biological countdown timers to our death. And instead of trying to fix that, we just decided to speed up our reproduction to compensate. Evolution was like, here's your expiration date, and we were like, cool, we'll just make more of us before then. The hive mind representatives stopped eating their drones long enough to exchange horrified glances with all their eyes. And don't even get me started on our immune system, Harold added cheerfully. It basically operates on a shoot first, ask questions later policy. Sometimes it gets confused and attacks our own bodies. But hey, we're still here. Zixtal, whose color had shifted to a pale lavender of despair, finally found their voice. How are you not terrified by this? Oh, we are, Harold assured them. We're pretty much constantly screaming internally. We just got really good at multitasking so we can scream internally while doing other stuff. In fact, some of our best innovations came from people who were screaming internally, particularly loudly. But the unknown sections, Mira 7 interjected, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to scientific ground. They're actively changing. We've documented several mutations just during this conversation. Yeah, that tracks, Harold nodded. We're basically in a constant arms race with viruses. They evolve, we evolve, they evolve faster. We drink more coffee and hopefully evolve faster too. Sometimes we win, sometimes we get the flu. Circle of life, you know? The room had gone so quiet you could hear the quantum fluctuations in the air. Let me see if I understand this correctly, Zixtal said slowly. all their tentacles aligned in the formal position of trying to prevent an existential crisis. Your species achieved spaceflight while being, essentially, a biological mystery box filled with jury-rigged survival mechanisms and unexplained genetic code that's constantly changing? Pretty much, Harold beamed. Though you forgot to mention the part where we need to temporarily lose consciousness for 8 hours every day or we go insane. We still don't know why, by the way. We just know it happens. A junior Vapori analyst in the corner began quietly condensing into a puddle of existential dread. But, this defies all known principles of evolutionary development, Mira 7 protested, their crystalline structure now showing distinct stress fractures. Species are supposed to develop complete understanding of their biology before achieving technological advancement. Harold scratched his head. Yeah, we kind of did everything backwards. We figured out how to split the atom before we understood why we needed to eat fiber. Speaking of which, anyone know where the bathroom is in this place? That coffee's hitting different. The Quantum Collective began spontaneously generating alternative universes, where they had never evolved consciousness to witness this conversation. This is unprecedented, Zixtal declared, their tentacles forming the sacred geometry of bureaucratic distress. We'll need to convene an emergency session of the Galactic Council. This changes everything we thought we knew about technological development and species advancement. Cool, Harold nodded. But seriously, about that bathroom. We don't have bathrooms, Mira 7 admitted. No species in the galactic census has required one for the past 12 million years. Harold's expression shifted to one of genuine concern for the first time in the conversation. Wow, that's actually the most disturbing thing I've heard today. How do you guys... You know what? Never mind. I saw a nice potted plant in the lobby that'll do just fine. The entire room erupted in horror, all species unanimously agreeing that humanity's genetic mysteries were no longer the most terrifying thing about them. Wait! Zixtal's voice cut through the chaos. What do you mean, do just fine? What are you planning to do to our decorative vegetation? But Harold had already left the room, whistling a tune that, unknown to the assembled aliens, was Another One Bites the Dust. In the following weeks, the Galactic Census Bureau would add several new classifications to their species database. Humanity became the first and only species to be categorized as mostly harmless but deeply concerning, evolutionary speedrunners, and approach with caution, may contain unexplained genetic mysteries and/or require bathrooms. They also replaced the potted plant in the lobby, but that's another story entirely. The incident sparked a galaxy-wide debate about the nature of evolution, technological advancement, and the importance of understanding one's own biology before reaching for the stars. Some species argued that humanity should be quarantined until they fully understood their own genetic code. Others suggested that perhaps their approach of figuring it out as we go along had some merit, given their remarkable achievements. In the end, the Galactic Council decided to create a new research initiative, Understanding the Human Phenomenon, when trial and error leads to interstellar travel. They appointed Harold as an advisor, primarily because no other human wanted to deal with the paperwork. Harold's first suggestion was to install bathrooms in all government buildings. His second suggestion was to introduce coffee to the galaxy at large. Both proposals were met with horror, fascination, and reluctant acceptance, much like humanity itself. As for the mystery of humanity's unknown genetic code, well, that's still being studied. But as Harold likes to point out, if we waited until we understood everything about ourselves before doing anything, we'd still be sitting in caves wondering why we have pinky toes. And somehow that explanation makes perfect sense, which might be the most terrifying thing of all. 3 standard galactic months after the genetic classification crisis, the Galactic Census Bureau was still dealing with the aftermath of Harold Jenkins's revelations. However, a new crisis had emerged, one that made the mysterious human DNA situation seem almost quaint by comparison. They're doing what? Zixtal's tentacles twisted into shapes that hadn't been seen since the great bureaucratic reform of the Third Age. Mira 7, who had somehow become the de facto human expert despite their best efforts, to avoid the position, vibrated at their most professional frequency. According to our latest reports, humans are attempting to establish what they call Starbucks franchises across 17 major spaceports. But we specifically classified their coffee as a Class 4 psychoactive substance, Zixtal protested, their color shifting rapidly between shades of bureaucratic outrage. Yes, well, Mira 7's crystalline structure flickered apologetically. They submitted a 47,000-page appeal arguing that coffee is, and I quote, basically just bean water, and therefore should be classified as a food product. Bean water? The Vapori representative condensed briefly in confusion. How can water extracted from legumes be psychoactive? That's the thing, Mira 7 explained, their edges dulling with resignation. They're not even aquatic legumes. They're roasted seeds from a terrestrial plant that humans discovered because, apparently, ancient Ethiopian goats were acting unusually energetic after eating the berries. The room fell silent as the various species processed this information. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Zixtal said slowly. Humans base their primary productivity-enhancing substance on the behavior of random goats? To be fair, came Harold's voice from the doorway, making several beings jump, or their species equivalent of jumping. A lot of our early medical discoveries were basically, this plant made some animals act weird, let's eat it and see what happens. That's not reassuring. Zixtal's tentacles formed perfect helixes of distress. Could be worse, Harold shrugged, sipping from what appeared to be his fourth coffee of the day. Wait until you hear about how we discovered fermentation. Speaking of which, has anyone reviewed our application for a bar license? The Quantum Collective immediately split into 17 parallel states, each one trying to exist in a reality where they hadn't heard that question. Mr. Jenkins, Mira 7 chimed cautiously, we're still trying to process the implications of your species consuming a psychoactive substance derived from roasted seeds based on the behavior of ancient goats. Perhaps we could delay the discussion of fermented beverages? Fair enough, Harold nodded. Though you might want to delay processing those implications until after I tell you about energy drinks. Did you know we basically took coffee and thought, what if we made it more intense and added bubbles? A junior Vapori analyst began precipitating in terror. But returning to the matter at hand, Harold continued cheerfully, about those Starbucks franchises? Absolutely not, Zixtal interrupted, all their tentacles pointing in the universal gesture of denial. We cannot allow the uncontrolled spread of your bean water across civilized space. Too late, Harold grinned. We've already got 3 locations operating in the Orion Spur. Turns out the Andromedans really like frappuccinos. Who knew silicon-based life forms could get a sugar rush? The room erupted into chaos once again. The hive mind representatives began stress-eating drones at an alarming rate. The Quantum Collective's probability states started showing up in impossible colors, and the Vapori created a localized rainstorm of pure anxiety. But we haven't approved any of this! Zixtal protested. Yeah, Harold scratched his head. About that. Remember how you guys said humans have an unprecedented approach to regulatory frameworks? Turns out that also applies to intergalactic business licenses. We figured it was easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. That's not how bureaucracy works. Zixtal's color had shifted to an entirely new shade of purple that the visual spectrum hadn't previously contained. Maybe not, Harold agreed. But it is how humans work. By the way, anyone want to try our new xenomorph espresso? It's made with our special, definitely not illegally modified coffee beans. They're bioluminescent. Mira 7's crystalline structure developed several new facets purely to express their horror. You genetically modified your psychoactive beans without approval, using your poorly understood DNA techniques? Modified is such a strong word, Harold waved dismissively. We prefer aggressively encouraged to glow in the dark. Also, they're blue. Marketing says it tested well with the Andromedans. The Quantum Collective gave up entirely and manifested as a cloud of pure mathematical uncertainty. This is a crisis of unprecedented proportions, Zixtal declared, their tentacles forming the sacred geometry of ultimate bureaucratic authority. We must convene an emergency session of the Galactic Council immediately. Great idea, Harold beamed. I'll bring samples for everyone. You haven't lived until you've seen a hive mind experience its first caffeine rush. Did you know they start colonizing things faster? We've had to put warning labels on the cups. Caution, may cause spontaneous empire building. As the room descended into further chaos, Harold checked his watch. Well, would you look at the time? I've got a meeting with some cetacean investors about underwater coffee shops. Apparently, they're really excited about something called Seattle's Best. He left the room whistling another Earth tune that, unknown to the aliens, was Coffee and TV by Blur. The Galactic Census Bureau would later add several new classifications to their species database. Caffeinated, potentially expanding faster than light through franchise operations, and warning, may attempt to sell you bean water. They also installed coffee machines in all government buildings, but that's yet another story entirely. The Galactic Council's Department of Xenobiological Research was having what humans would call a day. Let me ensure I'm documenting this correctly, Senior Researcher VIX 427 said, their bioluminescent appendages flickering with barely contained confusion. Humans require a daily period of unconsciousness. Sleep, Harold interrupted helpfully, stifling a yawn. He was attending this meeting via hologram because, as he'd explained, it was way too early on Earth. Yes, sleep, VIX 427 continued, during which they become completely vulnerable to predators, temporarily lose consciousness, and experience involuntary hallucinations. Dreams, Harold corrected, taking a sip from what appeared to be his 7th coffee of the morning. Though sometimes we call them nightmares if they're spooky. Fun fact, some of our best horror movies came from nightmares. You guys seen Alien yet? The research team collectively shifted away from the hologram. And you're telling us, VIX 427 pressed on, their bioluminescence now pulsing with scientific distress, that if humans don't experience this daily period of vulnerability and hallucination, they begin to malfunction, both physically and mentally? Pretty much, Harold nodded. If we don't sleep, we start seeing things that aren't there, can't form new memories, and eventually our organs shut down. But here's the weird part. We still don't know exactly why. The room's ambient temperature dropped several degrees as various species expressed their horror through thermal regulation. You achieved faster-than-light travel, one of the junior researchers squeaked. Without understanding why you need to be unconscious for a third of your life? Oh, that's not even the best part. Harold grinned, clearly enjoying himself. Sometimes we can't sleep even when we need to, so we invented these things called sleeping pills. Basically, we designed chemicals to force our brains to shut down temporarily. You deliberately engineer substances to induce unconsciousness? The entire research team's universal translators automatically capitalized their collective exclamation of horror. Well, yeah, how else are we supposed to deal with insomnia? Oh, and sometimes we drink warm milk. No one knows why that works either. We just know it does, sometimes, unless it doesn't. VIX 427's bioluminescent patterns began forming shapes that hadn't been seen since the evolution of conscious thought. But what about the hallucinations? The dreams? Those are fun, Harold said, yawning again. Sometimes they predict the future, sometimes they're just weird nonsense, and sometimes they're about showing up to important meetings naked. We've got whole scientific fields dedicated to figuring out what they mean, but mostly we just swap stories about the really weird ones over coffee. Over the psychoactive bean water that you use to force yourselves to stay awake when your bodies demand unconsciousness? Exactly. Though sometimes the coffee doesn't work, so we take naps. Those are like mini-sleeps. Very efficient. Some of our best inventors swore by them. Ever hear of Thomas Edison? He used to take naps while holding metal balls. When he fell asleep, they'd drop and wake him up, and he'd write down whatever he was dreaming about. Invented some pretty cool stuff that way. The research team began frantically updating their reports, creating an entirely new classification for species that make scientific breakthroughs through metallically interrupted unconsciousness periods. But what about the evolutionary advantage? Another researcher asked, their tentacles forming the universal symbol for trying to make sense of the senseless. Surely there must be some benefit to being unconscious and vulnerable for such long periods. Oh, sure, Harold nodded. We think it might help with memory consolidation, tissue repair, growth hormone regulation. But honestly, that's mostly educated guessing. We've got some theories about brain cleaning too, but it's still pretty mysterious. Kind of like how we're not sure why we yawn, or why yawns are contagious. He demonstrated with another yawn. 3 researchers involuntarily mimicked the yawning motion, then looked horrified at their own behavior. Did you just transmit an unconsciousness signal to us? VIX 427 asked, their bioluminescence now showing patterns previously only seen in deep space anomalies. Neat, right? No one knows why that happens either. We're basically walking mysteries that occasionally make other species yawn. Speaking of which, anyone else feeling sleepy? I hear these research meetings can be pretty boring. The entire research team began broadcasting emergency signals to their various homeworlds, warning them about humanity's ability to transmit their bizarre unconsciousness behavior across species barriers. Oh, and sometimes when we do finally fall asleep, Harold added cheerfully, we solve complex mathematical problems or make scientific breakthroughs in our dreams. The guy who discovered the structure of benzene dreamed about a snake eating its own tail. True story. You're telling us, VIX 427 said slowly, That some of your species' major scientific discoveries came from hallucinations experienced while unconscious. Yep, the sewing machine needle design, the periodic table, the theory of relativity, all influenced by dreams. We basically outsource some of our research and development to our unconscious hallucinations. Pretty efficient, if you ask me. The research team unanimously voted to create a new classification in the xenobiological database. Species that make scientific progress while unconscious. Approach with caution may induce sympathetic unconsciousness signals. Well, this has been fun, Harold said, checking his watch. But I think it's time for my afternoon nap. Got any metal balls lying around? The hologram flickered off, leaving behind a room full of terrified researchers who were all trying very hard not to yawn. In the following weeks, the Galactic Council would receive numerous requests for research funding to study what they termed the human sleep paradox. However, they had difficulty finding volunteers willing to observe humans during their unconsciousness periods, particularly after learning about the phenomenon of sleep talking. They did, however, install recliners in all government buildings. Just in case, the Galactic Physical Development Commission was experiencing what their human consultant would have termed an existential crisis. This cannot be correct, Commissioner Lux 9 declared, their energy form fluctuating with disbelief as they reviewed the latest human fitness report. You deliberately damage your muscle tissue to make it stronger? Harold, fresh from what he called a leg day, nodded while drinking something fluorescent green from a shaker bottle. Pretty much. Break it down, build it back up. No pain, no gain, as we say. But that's intentional self-harm. The commissioner's energy signature began displaying warning patterns. And what is that concerning substance you're consuming? Oh, this? Harold shook the bottle, making the green liquid swirl ominously. Just a protein shake with some BCAAs, creatine, beta-alanine, and a splash of pre-workout left over from this morning. You know, the basics. The room's various monitoring devices began registering unprecedented levels of bureaucratic distress. You're ingesting multiple synthetic compounds designed to enhance your muscle development? Senior Analyst QRX, a being composed entirely of mathematical probabilities, attempted to calculate the reasoning behind this behavior and promptly crashed. Though sometimes we just eat a bunch of chicken breasts instead. Did you know we used to think eggs were bad for us, then good for us, then bad again, and now they're good again? Nutrition science is wild. But, your species already has an undefined genetic structure, protested Junior Commissioner Wex 5, their gaseous form condensing with concern. Why would you deliberately introduce additional variables? Oh, that's not even the weird part, Harold grinned, pulling out his phone. Check out these before and after transformation photos from my gym buddy Steve. He used to be what we call skinny fat, but now he's totally shredded. The entire commission stared in horror at the images of dramatic human physiological restructuring. This is voluntary? Commissioner Lux 9's energy form dimmed to nearly infrared levels of shock. Your species chooses to undergo such extreme physical modifications? Absolutely. Some of us even do this thing called bulking and cutting, where we deliberately gain weight and then lose it again. It's like evolution speedrunning, but for aesthetics. The Commission's quantum probability calculator began smoking as it tried to process this information. But why? QRX had rebooted but was still struggling to compute the logic. What possible evolutionary advantage could there be to repeatedly lifting heavy objects and putting them down again? Honestly, Harold took another sip of his alarming beverage. Sometimes it's for health, sometimes it's for looks, and sometimes it's because we get really invested in numbers going up. Have you guys heard about CrossFit? It's like a religion, but with more burpees. What's a burpee? Asked a junior analyst, immediately regretting the question. Oh man, let me show you. Harold enthusiastically demonstrated the exercise, causing several energy-based beings to flicker in sympathetic exhaustion. We basically throw ourselves on the ground and then jump back up over and over. Sometimes we add a push-up in there just to make it spicy. You voluntarily subject yourselves to repeated controlled falling? The commissioner's voice had risen to a frequency that made the quantum calculators vibrate. Yeah, and that's just cardio. Wait until you hear about HIIT workouts. We basically alternate between periods of intense activity and slightly less intense activity until we feel like we're dying, but in a good way. The entire commission began generating emergency reports about humanity's apparently masochistic approach to physical development. But surely there must be some limit, Yex 5 asked hopefully. Some point at which humans decide they've achieved sufficient physical optimization? Harold laughed, pulling up more photos on his phone. Ever heard of bodybuilding? We've got whole competitions dedicated to seeing how much we can modify our bodies. Some people get so muscular they can't scratch their own backs anymore. We call that task failed successfully. And your medical professionals approve of this? Commissioner Lux-9's energy signature was now displaying patterns typically associated with deep space anomalies. Oh, medical science is still debating a lot of it, but that's never stopped us before. Did you know we invented protein powder? Before we fully understood how protein synthesis worked. We just knew that eating more protein made muscles bigger, so we thought, what if we concentrated it into powder form? Now we've got shops dedicated to selling nothing but supplements. The commission unanimously voted to create several new classification categories. Species that deliberately induces muscle trauma for enhancement. Practitioners of voluntary evolutionary acceleration. And, warning, may attempt to recruit you into their exercise cult. Speaking of which, Harold checked his fitness tracker. I'm due for my evening workout. Anyone want to join me for some deadlifts? I promise we'll start light, maybe just a few 100 pounds. The room emptied faster than a quantum probability collapse, leaving only Harold and his ominously glowing protein shake. In the following months, the Galactic Council would receive numerous concerned reports about humans being spotted performing ritualistic movement patterns in various public spaces, often while wearing specialized compression garments and listening to what they termed workout beats. They also installed a gym in the basement of the government building, but absolutely no one used it except Harold and a few brave, or possibly confused, Andromedans who had mistaken the squat rack for modern art. The Galactic Medical Research Institute's emergency meeting chamber had never been so crowded. Representatives from 17 different species had assembled to discuss what they were calling the human immune response crisis. I must ensure our records are accurate, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Zixix began, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns indicating severe professional concern. Humans possess an internal defense system that attacks unknown entities indiscriminately. Harold, who was present via hologram due to what he described as seasonal allergies, nodded while dabbing at his nose with a tissue. That's right. Our immune system basically operates on a shoot first, ask questions later policy. Sometimes it gets a bit too enthusiastic and attacks things it shouldn't, like pollen or peanuts. You mean to tell us, Dr. Zixix's crystalline edges sharpened with incredulity, that your defense mechanism occasionally mistakes harmless organic matter for deadly threats? Oh, absolutely. Some humans can't even pet cats without their immune system deciding it's time for total war. We call them allergies. It's like our bodies sometimes choose violence for no good reason. The assembled medical professionals began updating their databases with increasingly alarmed notations. But surely, Senior Immunologist Vex 7 interjected, their gaseous form swirling with scientific confusion. Your species has developed ways to control this overzealous response? Well, sort of, Harold sniffled. We have antihistamines, which basically tell our immune system to calm down and stop being so dramatic. Though sometimes that makes us really sleepy, which is fun when you're also trying to drink enough coffee to stay awake during important meetings like this one. You deliberately suppress your primary defense mechanism while simultaneously stimulating your consciousness with psychoactive substances? The room's medical monitoring equipment began registering unprecedented levels of professional concern. Reaching for another tissue. Sometimes our immune system gets bored and decides to attack our own bodies. We call those autoimmune disorders. It's like having an overenthusiastic security system that occasionally mistakes the homeowner for an intruder. The Institute's quantum diagnostic systems began generating error messages in previously undiscovered mathematical dimensions. But how do you survive? Dr. Zixix demanded. How has your species not succumbed to this apparently chaotic and self-destructive defense mechanism? Oh, we've got all sorts of tricks, Harold explained. Like vaccines. We deliberately introduce weakened versions of dangerous things to train our immune system. It's like sending your internal army to boot camp. You intentionally expose yourselves to pathogens? Vex 7's gaseous form began exhibiting previously unknown states of matter. Technically, we expose ourselves to dead or weakened pathogens, Harold corrected. Though sometimes we also just expose ourselves to regular pathogens by accident. And if we survive, we get what we call natural immunity. It's like letting your immune system learn through trial by combat. The Institute's AI assistant spontaneously developed anxiety protocols. And then there's the gut microbiome, Harold added cheerfully. Turns out we're basically walking ecosystems. We've got trillions of bacteria living inside us that help us digest food and regulate our immune system. Some scientists think they might even influence our moods. You're colonized by microorganisms? The entire medical panel began emanating waves of professional horror. Colonized? More like we've entered into a mutually beneficial arrangement with them. It's like having billions of tiny roommates who help pay rent by keeping us healthy. Though sometimes they get a bit rowdy, and we have to take probiotics to restore order. The Institute unanimously voted to create several new medical classifications. Species with self-attacking defense mechanisms, hosts of voluntary microbial civilizations, and, warning, may be experiencing random internal warfare. Speaking of which, Harold checked his watch. I should probably take my allergy medication. Anyone want to see what happens when I pet a cat without it? It's quite spectacular, in a medically inadvisable sort of way. The medical panel hastily adjourned, leaving behind only their increasingly alarmed research notes and several formally worded requests for hazard pay. In the subsequent months, the Galactic Council would receive numerous proposals for studying what they termed the human paradox, a species that survives despite itself. However, they had difficulty finding volunteers willing to observe humans during allergy season, particularly after learning about the phenomenon of man flu. They did, however, install tissue dispensers in all government buildings, just in case Harold visited during pollen season. The end.